Good afternoon. Happy Friday, everyone, and happy National Surveyors Week. Thank you for joining us for Nice Apple's Young Professionals Committee discussion on tips and tricks learned on the job. Before we get started, I want to go over a couple of items. Similar to our webinar process, we cannot hear you, but you should be able to hear us. So using your GoToWebinar dashboard, let's do a quick sound check using the raise your hand button. If you can hear me, please raise your hand now. And while we're waiting for some hands to go up, if you have any questions during any time during the program, please use the question box on your dashboard to type and send in your questions. The committee will address them as needed or at the end of the presentation. Okay, so I see that many of your hands are up. It looks like we are good to go. So now I'm going to turn everything over to our YP committee chair, Tim Massey. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Heather, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. As Heather mentioned, we have a pretty fun conversation this afternoon. We as a committee have had a bunch of conversations, trying to understand what is it that people want to hear about, and how can we keep it entertaining. So one of the things that we got discussing recently was, we don't have apprenticeships anymore, and mentorships are a little tough, and they don't really offer the same value in the field, if you will. So we said, well, what are some of the things that we've learned in the field that have helped us that somebody might not figure out on their own? So we've put together some tips and tricks that we've picked up. And let me tell you, there are things here that I've never heard of. I learned things during the conversation that we had as a team. So it should be pretty entertaining. Looking forward to the entire rest of the conversation. But let's get right in just to introduce who we are. My name is Timothy Massey, licensed surveyor in New York, working with National Grid, and again, the Nice Apple's chair. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. How you doing? I'm Mike Lewis. I'm a licensed land surveyor. I work for GDB Geospatial down here in Melville on Long Island. Excellent.
Ashley, will you do the honors?
Absolutely. My name is Ashley Metz. I'm here at MJ Engineering. I'm a survey technician.
Coming to you, Keith.
Hi, y'all. I'm Keith Burley. I'm a land surveyor in training with Marks Engineering out of Canandaigua, New York.
Awesome. And finishing up with you, Jason, saving the best for last.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I don't know if I can live up to that, but I'll try. My name is Jason Peterson. I'm the owner of Bethlehem Land Surveying here in Del Mar, just a little suburb of Albany. And I am extremely excited to impart some of my tips and tricks.
And let me tell you, Jason had a couple things here that we kept off the list that I still had never heard of. It was pretty impressive stuff. Hey, Heather, would you mind getting right into the first slide for us? Let's get into it. Let's see. Let's stop wasting time. Let's get into what we're talking here. Oh, man, this is a Mike Lewis special. Clearing paint cans and making sure that they work when you show up to the job site. Mike, why don't you hit us with this one?
Clearing spray paint cans. Yeah, it's a little pet peeve of mine, is especially in the wintertime when you leave the paint in the car overnight and it's about 28, 30 degrees and that tip freezes solid. Essentially surveyors are going to be using especially on a work site, you're going to be using that inverted spray tip quite often during the day, and that paint will clog up, coagulate in the tip, and you go to use it or you need to spray out a point on pavement. You want to be nice and clean and neat, and you want it to come out so that anyone can read that number if you're marking cuts and fills in the street. So pretty simple step. You shake it up, you use your paint, and when you're done, you point that tip straight up in the air and you just give it a couple of little quick squeezes and you clear out that paint that's in the tip. So you get a nice clear tip for the next time you use it at the end of the day. And if you're using a regular can of spray paint, you just flip it around and do it the other way. The whole point being is that these inverted tips, the tube inside is very short. They want to use all that paint. And with this normal spray can, it's a different tube inside. So you clear that tip when you're done.
Excellent. Yeah, that's very helpful. And a big thing that it kind of signaled to me when you mentioned keeping the spray cans in the truck overnight in the winter. It reminded me of a safety item that we don't have a slide for. I didn't prepare for, but I'm going to tell everybody who's on the line. an incident occurred some time back where a survey crew was keeping their acetylene torch, I guess it's not acetylene, I don't know what it is, the MAP gas or the propane torch for heating up the asphalt to try and chisel some things out. I've done it a gazillion times. Everybody's probably done it. On this particular day, the valve wasn't fully closed. Overnight, the cab of the truck filled with the propane gas. And when they went to open the truck in the morning, the overhead lamp light ignited the gas and blew the windshield off. Safety tip, don't do that. Don't be the guy that blows the windshield off. Just an important safety tip. Had nothing to do with spray paint, but just something to keep in mind of. I see some faces over there. Yeah, it was surprising. Let me tell you, the pictures were even crazier.
You think that's covered under insurance? How do you explain that one out?
I don't know. I'm sure they didn't get to the job that morning. I can tell you that one. All right. So what do we have? And Keith, I know you do a lot of this, a lot of mark out in the field. What else you got with the spray cans? You got to have a tip for up in the cold areas.
It's more of a surprise. So every young surveyor that we've had work with us did not know this tip or trick. And I'm one of myself. This is one of the first things I learned being a young rodman out in the field was I'm watching the guys spraying that up in there and I'm like, what the heck are they doing? So I asked the question, and just like it was basically explained to me, just as Mike explained it, of why you do that. Just to add on to that though is, over the years, we've probably wasted 5 to 6 cans of paint because it wasn't cleared out. So it's just something to think about as well. Is if you don't do that, it pretty much renders that paint useless. And you got to go back to the office to get another can. And I've had that happen to myself in the field. And it's frustrating when you're out and you need that can to do whatever job you have in front of you, and you go to use it and the tip's all clogged. So it goes into a time and efficiency thing that if it doesn't get done, it can create problems and frustrations in the field. So it might be something little, but it's super important.
Yeah, that's really great, and it's one of those things where I think you hit on a good point. It's kind of funny the first time you see somebody taking the spray can and just spraying it around in the air. You're like, what's this person doing? Just like it seems obligatory that every surveyor has to have fluorescent colored boots. Seems like an obligatory thing to call yourself a surveyor nowadays.
One thing to add on, sorry, Tim, one thing to add on with the clearing the spray can, don't do it in a residential driveway near the customer's, the homeowner's brand new white car.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Watch for the spray. Watch for the spray and where it's blowing to. That's a good tip. All right, Heather, what do we got for tip number 2? Tying flagging, pointing to the monument or stake location. So I threw a couple people off with this one. This was mine. When you're tying flagging, this was a tip that was taught to me. If you're out there tying flagging, and we have it here tying it to monuments or stakes, this also applies if you're tying it onto a fence post. When you're done tying your flagging, position the knot in the direction of what you're trying to identify. So if you're trying to identify the stake, tie the knot towards the stake. If you're trying to identify 2 different things on a fence side, on a fence corner, you might tie one flag to the one side and one flag to the other, so that way the knots can identify where you're actually supposed to be looking for some things. Ashley, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a great idea, but I think to take it even farther would be to be consistent with it. I know like a couple of the biggest things that I learned in the field was when you're out in the field and you do something one way and you go back to do that job and you've seen that at least the flagging was tied the right way, that you can have a level of expectation for the quality of the work that was done there, if you can recognize it. The electricians have something similar in the electrician world, is that if they walk to a job and they see that all the outlet screws in the job have been turned vertical to line up with the light switches, they know that an electrician that actually cared about the job was there last. So it's just a good little parting thing of making sure you're working to the hardest that you can.
No, it's a great way to look at it too, and it does. It's helpful. I can tell you many times going out into the field, going back and even following other crews that I worked with that used the same mentality, and it was very helpful. You know, so anything that really can help us identify what we're looking for in the field is a benefit to me. I'll tell you that one. All right, Mike, you're going to discuss using this plumb bob as a hammer. Heather, if you wouldn't mind. This is one of our more unorthodox tips, I suppose you would say, especially since I don't know who else is carrying around a plumb bob except Mike.
I'm probably one of the few holdouts of using a plumb bob. This one was, so I started as a rod person in 1998, and you know, we had this old plumb bob in the field vehicle, and it was all beaten up and chewed up like this one. And I said, "What's up with this plumb bob? What do you use it for?" And he says, "Well, you can use a plumb bob as a hammer." I said, "Well, why wouldn't you just carry, you know, a hammer in a carpenter's tool belt, you know, a regular, like a framing hammer or a finish, whatever?" So he says, "Oh, because you always have a plumb bob on your belt and it weighs less, blah, blah, blah." So sure enough, that day we were doing some curb stakeout and some title work and a whole bunch of different things. And we're walking down the street with Lath. Didn't know the trick about tying the ribbon, not pointing to the monument, but we used the plumb bob to tap the Lath into the dirt and mark the monuments that we had to locate that day so that we could see them when we were setting our total station control. And then through those first couple of years and even up until recently, I've used them to tack stakes. I've used them to knock slats of a stockade or wood fence out, and then I've used them to knock them back in. I've used them to hammer lath into the dirt. I've used them to, you know, in a pinch when I had a hammer stolen out of a field vehicle, I was trying to tap a mag nail into pavement and into curb joints and stuff. So as you can see, my plumb bob is pretty beaten up and weathered. And it's just another thing. And I kind of get it. You know, as I was doing the work, I said, it's kind of a pain in the butt to be walking through the woods with, forget just the framer's hammer, but a heavier lump hammer that you would use to pound stakes. Plumb bob's always sitting there in a pouch. It's always handy, you know, ready to use. And in the left photo, if you see how I've got the gammon reel string held back with my thumb in a certain way, and that's so that you don't tear your gammon reel string when you're using it to hammer down a lath or a tag or hammer up a section of stockade fencing after you've tapped it out to sight through yards or whatnot. It's one of those unorthodox things that was passed along to me, and I kept doing it as I went.
Well, it's definitely not not what I would expect to be using. Jason, you have to have a story about this too, right now?
Not necessarily about using it as a hammer, but another use that I've always found handy for it was if you're running a level and you need, you know, running through the grass and you need a place to do a TBM or get a turn, is just you know, punch in the plumb bob, and makes a great, with the gammon reel, it allows you to see it. So you know, if you're, you know, the person holding the level rod happens to step away, you know, you can still find the point that you did turn on. So you know, there are many things to use the plumb bob for other than its specific purpose, which can, you know, has its own techniques as well. But I may end up carrying a plumb bob just after this discussion for that makeshift hammer, because, you know, sometimes I just, you know, the hammer's back in the truck. Well, I don't want to be the one that walks back to the truck to need a piece of equipment. So.
Well, I'll give you one other thing that I've used the plumb bob for, which frankly, it sounds terrible, but it's probably been the most helpful thing for, is when you're trying to shoot line through the trees and you walk over and you take the plumb bob and you do a couple wraps around the branch that you need out of the way, and you just let it drop. Take your shot and go back and pick up your plumb bob. All right. Now, the next thing we have on, if you thought the plumb bob as a hammer was weird, this next one threw me for a loop. I've never heard of it. Our very own Keith Burley brought it up and apparently is a huge advocate of it. I'm assuming it's an upstate thing, but I don't really want to be the guy that puts it on an entire region. So I'll let Keith explain what a surveying spoon is.
I just want to start off. This is the first tool I got as a surveyor, before a tape, before a pouch, before anything. This is my surveying spoon. You see there's dirt on it. I just used it the other day on the field. I actually got this as a gift from the surveyors I work with. I showed up the office from Christmas break from school, and it was sitting on my desk with a red bow on it. I saw this in the first day I was on the field. The surveyor I was working with had it in his back pocket, and he's walking around with it. I said, Dave, why are you carrying a spoon? He goes, oh, I'll show you. So the team I worked with, 2 older surveyors, whenever they're trying to find their control nails, they would wand that area with the showing stat. And when they got close, instead of using a chipping hammer or a shovel to dig up the nail, they would dig with a spoon real delicately so they didn't, move that control nail. So from that day forward, that's how I always locate our mag nails when they're in dirt, sod, grass, so we always set them right below the grade. On a few occasions, I wasn't thinking and got a signal and used that shovel and took that scoop out, and there's my control nail. And then you know where you are after that. So I live and die by my survey spoon to find control. Use it every single day I'm out in the field. I use it to set mag nails. If I don't have a hammer or a plumb bob with me, I take that and I put it right on top of the mag nail and I push down as hard as I can to set the mag nail. Another thing it's really useful for, I use it all the time, is when we have rebars that have been set a long time ago and there's trees growing around it and the roots have intertangled around the rebar. I can get a signal with a showing stat, and you dig a hole with a shovel and you see the roots, but there's something there, and I can dig around the roots and actually find the nail or find the rebar or pipe monument that's there. So I use that on a daily basis too, digging holes just to find that monument under tree roots and things like that. So it's something that I never leave the office without, and if I do, I turn around and go get it or have an extra one in the truck. Quick thing about the spoon is you can't just use any spoon. You have to use a heavy duty, strong spoon. It can't be a cheap spoon. So when you're digging in, it doesn't bend or warp. And we have a couple here in the office that are about worn in half because they've been used for so long. So my favorite survey tool.
I'm sure that's what the Oneida spoon people were thinking about when they created their little commune. Ashley, you're near Albany. Is this a thing? Is survey spooning a thing?
I've definitely never heard of survey spoon in such technical terms. However, we have, it's a very good solution to a common problem, especially how Keith is talking about, getting in around the roots and all that. I've used a dock spike for the longest time, but I might be carrying a spoon now because you can definitely scoop and remove the soil instead of just chiseling around. So I'm liking it. It's a good, I think I might buy one for every truck.
Listen, it makes sense. There's no doubt about it. It makes sense to me. I used to just use a long nail and just start scraping everything and then stick my face down in the hole and start blowing as hard as I could, hoping all the dirt and everything would come out. And, it ends up with a weird way when you blow your nose afterwards. But, listen, that was my method. The survey spoon, on the other hand, I think is a real nice one. And Keith, I got to say, it had me thinking about it for quite a while after our conversation. It still kind of makes me laugh, just thinking that it has its own name.
I'm gonna assume now that when I'm out in the field and my metal locator picks up a spoon that's been buried in the ground, I'm going to assume this land has already been surveyed. Somebody seasoned has been here.
Just to add to this spoon right here has been left on probably 6 job sites, and I drove back to that job site to get that spoon. And my coworkers found it on job sites, like doing a redate, lost a spoon. He went back and found it with a show and stat. So I'll keep that one for a long time.
It sounds like it really takes a special spoon to become a surveying spoon. That's what it sounds like to me. Oh, listen, we got another. This one's listen. Survey spoon was kind of our top there. That was the one that really hit me for the best. We have other exciting ones, but nothing that's going to be quite as exciting as this. Covering our tripod legs, not as exciting as a survey spoon. But Jason, why don't you get into this? This feels like you're kind of a picture.
Oh man, yeah, that was a early lesson. I started surveying in Florida. This technique, along with figuring out what Carhartts were and snow boots, this is a very important tip. When obviously you have to dig out where you want to put your traverse point and set your legs, but man, inevitably they settle, they fall out of level. The tip here would be to pack snow around the legs of the instrument or even the back sight, because it just insulates it and keeps it from falling out of level. It is extremely frustrating to continually have to level up either the instrument or the back sight, and even more so now with the robotic instrument where you got to walk back to the robot, re-level it, then get another back sight, and then walk out there and just to take 10, 15 more shots before you have to walk back, re-level it. And obviously when there's snow on the ground like this in the photo, it's a lot easier. But when you're getting into the tail end of the season where things are starting to thaw, you have that movement, a lot more movement, and you have to be looking around for snow and find a shovel and bring it over to the legs, because the ground is just settling so fast that it falls out of level, and it's frustrating, and it can really impede productivity.
Yeah, and that's something that I never, I don't think I've ever surveyed enough in the snow to really ever have thought of that. Really a great tip, packing them around to essentially insulate everything below that it doesn't drop. That's really, really pretty cool. Ashley, you've got to have some kind of experience with this as well, right?
I do. It's the reverse of that situation that we see there on the screen, and that would be that in the middle of the summer, when you're working on brand new asphalt, that the legs can do the same exact thing. So I was always taught to take hubs for setting, foundations, and put them underneath the tripod legs and step them in just like normal, but on top of the wooden lath. That way it would either disperse the weight across the board or just limit the actual point of diving into the asphalt, or using, your case to cover the asphalt in that area, keep it in the shade so it just doesn't get quite as hot, because it is a pain to go back and re-level and reset. And if you can avoid that, you can be more productive. So definitely something to be aware of. And if you're doing it right from the beginning, you're setting yourself up for success.
Absolutely, and we're talking about making sure the legs don't move on you. One of the things that I found to be very helpful was the leg frame. It's basically it looks like a little triangle with holes in the corner of it. And when you're working on an indoor area where you're doing some type of layout on a slipperier surface, having that tripod that you can basically put each leg into and create that stable base was another one of those things that really helpful. Keith, I'm sure you've also dealt with handling the tripod legs in the wind and everything using the sandbags and whatnot, correct?
Yeah, so one thing I was taught pretty early on is we often set up on the side of the road with 1 or 2 legs on the pavement, one like in the shoulder. and I was out in the summer and it was 90 degrees out and the instrument kept going out of level and I was getting frustrated. And the surveyor I was working with it walks over, laughs, and he goes, "Watch this." And he just went on the side of the road and grabbed dirt and gravel and scooped it in his hands and put it around each leg, like a few inches around each leg, because we were going to be there for a while. And he goes, "That will stop that from sinking down in the asphalt," as Ashley said. So that's just one of my habits. Whenever I set up on the side of the road in the summer, I grab some of the shoulder dirt and material, pack it around the legs, and 9 out of 10 times, it helps a lot to where I don't have to re-level.
Yeah, it's an awesome tip because it really is. I mean, just the frustration of just what you said, Jason, where you have 5 shots left and all of a sudden you get the notice that you're at a level and you're walking all the way back because it was your last shots, and that's the extra hour to the end of the day that ruins your drive home.
Yeah, I'm really thankful my my robot does not have a soul or a personality, because it gets yelled at a lot.
Uh-huh.
So I'm really thankful for that.
It'd have some pretty hurt feelings, you're saying. All right, what do we got next? We have, I don't even know what tip we're up to. Tip 5, 6, something like that. I think this one is a Mike Lewis special, right? Mike and Jason, I think you guys were all over this. Mike, you want to touch us? I think we lost you on video, but we still have you on the line, right?
You still got me? Can you hear me?
We got you.
Awesome. That's what everyone wants to hear, is my voice. So after you use your plumb bob to slap your lath down in the middle of the woods and you've tied your ribbon off and the knot's facing the monument, you take yourself a piece of ribbon, you tie it off to the lath, and you swing it up to the tree, as you can see down there in that video and that picture there. And again, you know, you're walking through the woods, depending on how your workflow goes. We used to try to find all these monuments, depending on the size of the parcel or what the tasks were for the day. You're not necessarily setting up instrumentation that day and locating all these monuments. So it serves a couple of purposes. You flag the monuments, you're walking through the woods, you can kind of look back. You can use them sometimes to create, you know, a straight line and say, well, here's, you know, this could be the property line that I'm walking, because there's no fences, there's no houses, there's just trees and woods and everything else there. Or you're setting up your controls, you're getting ready to perform some sort of traverse or to set points off of your main traverse to locate these marks and monuments. And it at least gives you an idea of, you know, can I see through the woods to get where this monument is, or what do I have to cut and trim out of the way to create a little bit of a sight line so that you can locate these marks and monuments in the woods. It's just another one of those tips and tricks. And I know me personally, whenever I go to do a job and I see that it's already been flagged for me by the guy who was there, whether it's 6 weeks ago, 6 months ago, or 6 years ago, and you got that ribbon laying around, it's kind of like a thank you for leaving something behind to help me out.
Ain't that the truth? It's a nice thing to see when you roll up on site and you see that there's some flags and lath in the neighborhoods, right? The other thing, listen, the one that if you're working on the road often and you're doing this, I always carry a can of paint with me. And the one thing that I always end up doing is putting that can of paint on top of my point so that I can actually see it from wherever it is I'm trying to find. That's another fun one when you're not out in the middle of the woods here. Jason, you have to, I mean, you spend your time out here in the woods. You've got to have some tricks with this, right?
Well, and this photo actually says it all, and it ties back into the, no pun intended here, but it ties back into one of the earlier slides. You can see somebody's gone back and refreshed the flagging, but you can see the old flagging has the knot facing towards the monument. So it's not even it's not some sort of regional thing. That's actually a technique. And I think the way that this streamer is, I mean, it is perfect. If you don't have a tree to tie it to, the other thing is to find a sapling that's nearby, chop that, sharpen it up, punch that next to the point, and then tie that up to the top of the to the sapling, which is now your green stick, and it's a little bit, you know, less at an angle, and it gives you more of an idea of exactly where the point is, because here you just have to project down towards where that monument is if you're looking to set up pretty far away. But the green stick would be your next trick if there wasn't a tree to tie it to.
Well, and let's put a disclaimer on that for everybody out there. That may or may not be an appropriate practice in your area, chopping down trees in people's yards to make a sight line. I can tell you here in the downstate region, if we had left this much flagging up in the back of somebody's house, we probably would have 8 different people calling and trying to figure out what municipality was here, who was doing this, what work was happening. So being mindful about where you are. But just like you're saying, the care that this photo shows for the folks who are out there, both present and previously, I mean, really identifies and helps the surveyor figure out where they're looking. To your point with the knot, if that flagging was tied all around that tree, where are you looking? Now we have a pretty good idea of the direction that we're looking for. So great stuff with that.
Tim, can I add something to that real quick?
Certainly can.
Oh, this is a prime example of how we flag out in the field, especially on the woods. And one thing that I always try to do is make sure that flagging going to the tree, that if you can, tie to a tree on the parcel that you're surveying. Because I have had clients say, oh, all the flagging's gone. And I'm like, I know I put flagging there. Well, the neighbor came out, saw that flagging on their tree, ripped it right down, and then our client went out to walk the property and it's gone. So that's one thing I stressed our crew in the field is if you can, to always try to get that on a tree on your parcel, so none of the neighbors get upset when they see that walking through.
I think we're missing you, Tim.
I was going to say it's a good tip, whether you're out there flagging, setting control, whatever the case may be. Is I always make the effort to minimize what it looks like on the neighboring properties. So it's a great one, Keith. So we're gonna
throw in here too.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I was gonna give you it for the next one, but you shoot in for this.
Well, there you go. I saw it came through as well on the chat, and they beat me to it to be able to speak about it. But that the 3 flags here in the picture, and whoever's got this picture, it's the prime example for what we were trying to talk about here. Is the 3 flags on the tree indicates a corner. At my time with working with the DEC, I found that to be very true, that the DEC marks out a lot of the corners that way. And just taking the care to take the time to do it that way indicates, in the field that there's something there. So look around first off, and it is a corner of the property. So that's useful as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, it's not something I've personally seen a lot of, but I mean, I'd be very envious if I found this tree in the woods, to be honest with you. Whew. So we have one of our best tips coming up that I think is probably one of the most helpful, because unless you have somebody show this to you, you're probably not doing it in the field. Ashley, why don't you get into understanding how we do a offset distance and how that's represented?
Yeah, absolutely. It's become less of a technique that you have to use simply because we have the technology just to do it right in the collector now. But it was something that I was taught when I was first out in the field. And that was, if you've got something blocking a point that you want to shoot, here's the example of the end of the fence, the trees in front of the fence. And you'll have to forgive my poor graphics here, but this is the best I could put together. So if you're trying to shoot behind the tree, like this has set up here, if you want to go to the next slide, there's a couple options that you can do. The first one would be to take a couple shots at increments in a line away from the point. And here you see we've got one at 5 feet, one at 10 feet, and another one at 15 feet. And that's simply so you can take the shot, and then back in the office, you can just, in the computer, or even however you're doing it, you can just do a simple circle, and wherever all three of those points intersect is your point there in this example. And then if we go to the next one, similar situation, you would just, measure out the same distance away from the point at different points. Make a note of the distance away from your make a note of your offset distance. And then again, when you get back into the office, just set up your circles from that offset distance, and where they intersect is your point. In this example, it would be even better if you did a third offset, because then you'd be able to really triangulate where it is. If you're doing this out in the field and you're not the person doing it in the office, it's a really good note for this example to make sure that they know which intersection it is, because in this example, it sets you up for failure. You get two intersecting points from two circles, and they don't always know which one to hold. So you gotta really make sure that if you do this method, you take good notes. But I've found that I've used this in the past when, even though I've done all the other tips of, flag it up right, make sure you can see it from your setup, you still make mistakes. It's gonna happen. And so if I haven't been able to locate something, this is what I've done in the past before I learned that you could do it in the instrument.
And that's a good point, Ashley, because oftentimes it's the last shot of the day that you need that you can't get. And this is one of those things that, if for the folks who are out there who have done, inline offsets for construction staking, we're essentially talking about the same thing. Find that point and then get your shots on the same line, and you can calculate where that intersection is. Jason, this has to be something you do all the time where you're working.
Yeah, these are definitely great techniques. I do offsets quite often, and I think the thing to remember here is, for fences, perfect to do offsets. Obviously, know what points are important and can't, suffer the consequence of an offset. But it is a really great technique. Like you said, it's getting towards the end of the day. I just have to get the end of this fence. Give me a distance here, or a flagpole, mailbox, anything that doesn't necessarily have to be certified as critical to the job site. So yeah, this is a great technique.
Yeah, and and I think that's a key point to make is, there's obviously applications for this technique, and there's applications that this is not appropriate for. One of the things that I tend to use it for is if we're doing something that, maybe we're not signing, but we need to locate some things, we're locating them with the GPS. I can't get, two things with the coverage. I might be locating a corner and just pulling a distance out, taking two inline shots just so I can offset for the tree I'm trying to locate. That is, I'm trying to get out from underneath that canopy. So it's a really, really useful technique that, I have a feeling that if you aren't out there working on a multi-person crew, it's probably not something you come across. Keith, what about you? I know that you've had quite a bit of mentoring and folks in the field, but is this something that you've seen some of the folks accustomed to, or is this new to some people?
Yeah, so this is one thing I enjoy teaching. We get a lot of city lots that have intersecting fences everywhere, at every corner. You have a fence coming in from each corner, and a lot of times you can't get on the corner where they intersect. So what we'll do is take two shots on each fence, if we can, and then take that line and then measure down to the corner of that fence or the end of the fence. But if the fences do intersect, you take two shots on one fence, as long as it's straight, two shots on the next fence, again, if it's straight. And then, like Ashley said, in the office, you just take those lines, extend them, there's your fence corner. You don't have to have a whole new setup to go locate the intersection of those fences. So that's something here in the city of Canandaigua with fences everywhere. We run into that a lot and use the offsets a lot, 2-point offsets. Another thing we do too with GPS is when we're out, 2,000-3,000 feet off the road with GPS in the woods, or on the edge of a field, we'll do the distance offsets for pins or old stone walls. We use 2-point offsets for fencing and hedgerows all the time using GPS. So we'll run a field line where there's a fence running a hedgerow that's 30-40 feet in the woods that we can't get GPS. So we'll have a guy holding the tape on the fence. We'll come out 100 foot with the tape, take 2 shots, and then have the distance to the fence. And there's your GPS shot for the fence using those offsets. So it's something we use a lot, and we like to teach, especially in the summer when the coverage comes in.
That's awesome, and it is. It's very helpful. That's an interesting use of it. I've never worked on something to that extent. So that's an interesting use case for it. We have our next trick or tip, which I don't know if it's a trick or a tip. It sounds more like eluding to me. Mike Lewis, I'm pretty sure this was yours. Why don't you get us into it about free railroad spikes?
If it's for free, it's for me.
Yeah, I believe that.
Not that I've ever walked a railroad right of way without flag protection, because that's highly frowned upon. But you're walking the vicinity of a railroad right of way and you see some spikes laying around. Plenty of construction sites I've been on where, for whatever reason, the roofers decide to leave a whole box of nails behind, and they're all kind of rusted out and just laying there headed for a dumpster. But a railroad spike is a great thing to have in your field vehicle. You can use them as control points. You can use them as property markers. You can use them as turning points for level runs. They're easy to find. They last forever. Roofing nails and finishing nails and common nails on a work site, I would always be walking around. I would grab a handful if I saw them just laying there and they're sweeping up. They're obviously done with them because the house is finished and we're doing a final survey on it, and there's still a box of rusty nails laying around. And you can use those things for one trick that never really made it into this because of modern data collectors and stuff is when we were working in the woods, or if we were working on a site, a lot of times we would set like a backside check would be something like a tack and ribbon and a nail, or a nail in a tree, or a tack and ribbon in a pole. Just something where you're set up on a point, you've taken your backside down the street, and you want to turn an angle to something, so you can always come back to it and make your check, because you're not necessarily going to have a tripod set up over your backside for a long time. And I have used railroad spikes to do the same thing, where I was set up. I was surveying along a piece of property that had a railroad behind it, and we found a couple of spikes, and I sighted long, down the edge of the woods, and we were using just a rod for a backside. So I had the rod guy. I said, stick a spike in the dirt. You put a piece of pink spray paint on the front of it so I can see it, and take a black magic marker and put a line so I can put them on 0. So I was sighting down. I said, give me your 0. There it is. Make a mark. Not necessarily the most accurate way to do things, but in a pinch, it was a way of at least knowing that when the train came by and I was on the edge of the woods there, outside the right of way, any kind of vibration from that train going by, if it might have shaken me up a little bit, I had a way of checking a couple of angles to make sure that I was still where I needed to be before I had somebody hoof it back to where the backside was to reset my whole site. So that's just a way to use materials that are made available, kind of like a MacGyverism. It's a way to use things made available to you as you're reconning through the woods and the fields and things.
Mike, you're giving away free tips now too. I mean, come on. This was just one tip. It wasn't supposed to be 2 tips in one.
Free advice to those youngsters.
But I tell you, the one thing that I don't use railroad spikes too often in what I do, but I'll tell you the best thing that I use them for is for benchmarks, because that rounded top, there is no question as to where that top of that benchmark is. Really helpful and from one of some of the stuff that I've been doing. And we actually go right from railroad spikes to addressing setting our control. Jason, I know you put together a really nice slide deck here showing exactly what we're discussing when we're talking about breaking pavement to set these mags.
Yeah, this is another thing that that I had to learn, transferring up from the south, is setting the mag nail a little bit below the surface. We just did not have to worry about that down in Florida. As a matter of fact, nails with discs were commonplace in the sidewalk, in the center line of the road, the points of intersection, all monumented, all above ground, all because you didn't have to worry about a plow. So setting the mag nail just below the surface to allow the plow blade to go over, allow even even one of those site tractors that has the brush to clear the dirt, it'll miss your traverse point. So this is a really good technique to be able to have a traverse point to last from one season to another season, because you can be very frustrated again that you've started a project one year and then you've come back the next year and your traverse points is off, your control points are already gone, and it could be because you just didn't set it enough and a plow got it. So using the hammer to make a nice divot, perfectly rounded just like the head of the hammer, will allow a nice surface to pound that nail in, and it's very valuable. I don't set anything in the pavement without having done this first.
I'm in the same boat, same exact thing. And the thing that's funny is you learn it after you show up to a site after a few times, and you can find the hole that the nail was ripped out of. Hey, you listen, you shoot it for a check. That's it. You don't use it for control, but you shoot it as a check, right? Keith, you've got to be dealing with this thing too, right?
Yeah, I learned this one the hard way. No one ever taught me this or even said anything. And just like you said, Tim, I came to the job and the PK was bent right over, and I'm like, well, I guess we're not using that anymore. And it was honestly frustrating because on that particular job we didn't have a lot of control. So I just kind of figured this one out. I wish I had saw this about 4 years ago. One thing I will say about this is I see in the picture there's some flagging on the mag, and that's something we do as well. One thing that I also learned the hard way is if I do have to set a mag or a PK near a boundary line or near a corner, especially on the city lots, is I never put flagging on them. I've gotten a handful of calls from a client and say, hey, I see this nail over here and it has flagging on it. That's my corner, right? And then we have to go through and explain them what control is, and that sometimes can be challenging in itself. So that's one thing I've kind of grown accustomed to, is if it's close to a boundary corner in a city lot, I never put flagging on it so it doesn't catch their eye.
And I think that's a key thing that gets lost at times when you're setting your control. We often when you're early in your career, it's a little bit of a mystery as to where to set control, why we're setting it in certain spots. The one thing to remember is just don't set it where you think the property line is. Set it anywhere else on the property. Just don't set it along a property line or a corner. That's all as surveyors we really can hope for, I think. But Jason, in addition to setting mags in pavement, you also have a technique for setting hubs for stakeout, correct? On the next slide.
Can I jump in there before we run to that one?
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead, Ashley.
Similar to this, I did a lot in the early years of doing subdivisions, and we used catch basins as our monumentation, and we would just do like a box cut or an X cut into the actual catch basin frames. And I learned after about 2 winters that you don't want to do it on the first corner when a snowplow's coming. You want to do it on the next corner, because they eventually shear that corner off and you don't have monumentation anymore, even though you thought you've set it in like one of the most permanent things out there. You've definitely got to go, when you're looking at oncoming traffic, it's not the first corner of the catch basin, it's the next corner. Because the plows are more likely to shear off or hit or disturb that corner, as opposed to the next one in line there.
And if that tip doesn't qualify for like a little known thing that you would never know until you find it out, I think that qualifies. Heather, you want to just pop us to that next slide? We're going to get Jason telling us about how we set these hubs. Or actually, Ashley, why don't you get into it? You're into it, right?
Well, I don't want to rob Jason from you. He did these wonderful pictures, so I'm not going to rob him from that. I might have some comments, but we'll see.
All right, go ahead, Jason. Let's see what you got. I like the pictures.
This technique is something that, you know, if you're on a crew, you always have somebody to give you that sort of direction and pass down this sort of information. But the direction that you face this hub, you were trying to maximize the working surface to receive any corrections that you may need when you're setting your point. So when setting the hub, the idea here is to have the diamond point back towards the instrument operator, because that's where you're going to be receiving your corrections. And when it's on the point, it allows you to maximize the working surface. So I put the tape measure on there just for a visual reference, and it's not much, but every little bit helps, because inevitably you'll be right on the edge. You'll think you have enough room. You drive that tack in, and you chip it off, and then all of a sudden now you're resetting the hub, or just we're trying to be as productive as possible, and you know, these are your tips in order to do so. So having it facing towards the instrument, it will maximize that entire, allow you to utilize the entire hub to receive any corrections that you may need.
All right, Ashley, let's hear those comments.
All right, well, this is something I didn't know until we brought it up here. I'd spent probably close to 2 years doing a lot of just subdivision, work, where all you did was you set up foundations, and I never was taught this, and I was always horrible at it until I got good. And so I had a very long time of frustrations where I would have to knock that hub a little bit just to make it work. And if I had known this, I think I would have understood it faster, and then I think I would have been able to do the work faster. So I think it's definitely something good to teach, the young guys out there who aren't always gonna know how to do it. And I think it would definitely reduce the frustration of having to either pull the hub and reset it again, which is never gonna really give you a solid set again, because you're trying to put it back in the same spot. And then especially it would help with trying to just move that tack in there just a little bit. And once you get it too close to the edge, like Jason's saying, you get right there to the edge, and then you go to tap it in, and it just breaks the side off. This is always the most frustrating thing. But this was something that I learned, and I was, now that I don't do it, I was very happy to learn it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I don't know at what point in my career I learned it, but I've never seen it so easy to understand as the way that you put these pictures together. Like, yeah, so you can explain it, but seeing it like this, you go like, oh yeah, I get it. So very, very nice graphic you put together here, Jason. Appreciate it. Well, that about wraps us up. We're only 5 minutes shy. I think we hit on all 10 of our tips and tricks, and I think there was even a couple bonus in there. So I'd like to thank everybody on behalf of the Young Professionals Committee. for joining us today. We'd love to hear some of your feedback, whether, there's going to be a survey that'll come out afterwards. Please let us know if this was helpful. Tell us what your favorite tip or trick was. Is this what you want to see again? Do you want to see something different? We're here. We're here working for you guys. So keep us posted. Let us know. And we hope you enjoyed it. Heather, I know you've got something to say before we close. So.
Yep. Before we sign off, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and a big thank you to the Young Professionals Committee and their time and dedication. As Tim said, a short evaluation will be sent to you this afternoon. Please take your time to fill it out and provide some feedback. So thank you all for attending, and have a great weekend.
Thanks all.
Bye.